Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's, well, pretty close to home. Epithelial tissue.
It really is. We're talking about the stuff that lines our organs, forms our skin. It's like the ultimate barrier between us and the outside world.
Totally. And it's easy to take it for granted, right? But without it, we'd be in a real mess.
Absolutely. And you've brought some great notes from an anatomy and physiology class. Looks like a pretty thorough one.
Oh yeah, those notes were intense, but super helpful for wrapping my head around all the different types of epithelial tissue.
Definitely. So are you ready to go from memorizing layers and shapes to really appreciating how amazing this tissue is?
Absolutely. Let's unravel the secrets of epithelial tissue. So the notes start by comparing epithelial tissue to a brick wall, which is a pretty good analogy, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. It creates that essential barrier, protecting our internal environment from, well, everything out there.
Right, and just like a brick wall needs mortar to hold those bricks together.
Epithelial cells have their own special mortar glycolipids, though these are like the body's natural sealant, not only holding those cells together, but also because they're hydrophobic.
Meaning they repel water.
Exactly. It's what keeps us from, well, leaking fluids everywhere.
That is an image I could have lived without. But you're totally right. Our epithelial tissue must be doing a stellar job of keeping everything contained.
Absolutely. And it's not just about preventing leaks. Think about all the places where our bodies interact with the outside world or need to control what passes through.
Like our digestive system. It's basically a long tube lined with epithelial tissue, right? From our mouth all the way.
Exactly. A continuous protective barrier for our food to travel through.
And I'm guessing the type of epithelial tissue changes depending on where you are in the digestive tract, right? Like different areas, different jobs to do.
You're spot on. Form follows function. And that's where classifying epithelial tissue gets really interesting.
Right. The notes mention something about layers and shapes, and that's where I started to get a little lost.
It can seem a bit confusing at first, but the naming system is actually quite logical once you get the hang of it. The first part of the name tells you how many layers of cells there are. Simple means a single layer.
And stratified means multiple layers, like a stack of pancakes.
Exactly. Simple and stratified. And the second part of the name tells you about the shape of the cells.
So we'll see terms like squamous for flat cells.
Right. Cuboidal for cube-shaped cells, and columnar for those tall, slender cells that resemble, well, columns.
It's like a biological naming game. Okay, so let's put it all together. Simple squamous epithelium. That would be a single layer of flat cells, and you'd find it in places
Where
where...
things need to move across quickly, the thinness of those flat cells makes them perfect for diffusion. The best example, your lungs.
Because oxygen needs to get from the air into the bloodstream as fast as possible.
Precisely. Simple squamous epithelium allows for that rapid exchange of gases.
Which makes you realize why things like smoking and air pollution are so harmful. You're basically damaging that super thin, delicate layer of cells.
It's a really powerful visual, isn't it? Now, what about simple cuboidal and simple columnar epithelium? We're still talking about single layers, but with larger, more, well, cube-like or column-like cells, right?
Exactly. So where would we find those guys?
Well, simple cuboidal epithelium, with its neat rows of cube-shaped cells, is often found lining ducts and glands. It's all about secretion and absorption there.
Okay, so think of those cube-shaped cells as the workforce of the glands, moving substances along.
Precisely. And then there's simple columnar epithelium, which is often found in the digestive tract.
You're right. Those tall cells, kind of like columns, make sense for lining the intestines.
Yeah.
They must form a sturdier barrier.
Absolutely. And they have a secret weapon, microvilli.
Microvilli, those tiny finger-like projections on the surface of the cells.
The very same. And they're all about increasing surface area, which is essential for maximizing absorption. Imagine trying to catch raindrops.
With a flat hand versus your fingers spread wide.
Exactly. Microvilli are all about catching those nutrient raindrops as efficiently as possible. So clever. Okay, we've covered simple squamous, simple cuboidal, and simple columnar.
Don't forget about pseudostratified columnar epithelium.
Oh, right. That one always trips me up. It looks like it has multiple layers, but...
It's a clever illusion. It's just a single layer of cells, but the nuclei are at different heights, which makes it look stratified.
So where does this master of disguise hang out in the body?
You'll often find it lining the trachea or windpipe.
And it has an important job to do there, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. This is where those tiny hair-like structures called cilia come into play.
Oh, right, cilia. They're like tiny brooms sweeping things along, right?
Precisely. Alongside goblet cells that secrete mucus. They work together to trap inhaled particles and sweep them away from the lungs, like a built-in cleaning crew for a respiratory system. Okay, so we've covered all the simple types of epithelial tissue. Now it's time for the big leagues, stratified. We're talking multi-layered for that extra protection, right? Now we're talking serious protection. Stratified squamous epithelium. That's our skin's outer layer, right?
Exactly, the epidermis. It's built for constant wear and tear.
Which makes sense because we're constantly shedding skin cells. It's kind of wild when you think about it. Our outer layer is constantly being replaced.
It really is, and it all starts with that bottom layer, the stratum basal.
The stratum basal, that's where those stem cells are hanging out, constantly dividing to create new skin cells, right?
Precisely, and those new cells don't just stay put. They have quite the journey ahead of them, actually, as they migrate up through the layers of the epidermis.
So it's like a cellular highway with all these new cells traveling up to the surface. And I'm guessing they're changing as they go.
Exactly. It's called differentiation. As those cells move up through the layers, they change their structure and function, eventually becoming those tough outermost cells that protect us from, well, everything.
It's amazing how our bodies can just do that, create these intricate systems of renewal and protection without us even realizing it. So we've covered epithelial tissue pretty extensively.
Well, we've covered the epithelial tissues themselves pretty thoroughly, but don't forget about glands. They're also made up of epithelial tissue.
Oh, right. The notes did mention glands, but they seem so different from protective barriers and linings.
They are in their function, for sure, but structurally, they share that epithelial origin. Think of glands as the body's little factories, producing and secreting substances that play all sorts of roles.
Right. Like our sweat glands, for example. They secrete sweat to help us cool down.
Exactly. And depending on how they release those substances, glands are broadly categorized as either exocrine or endocrine.
Exocrine versus endocrine. Remind me what the difference is again.
Sure. Exocrine glands, like sweat glands, have ducts. Think of them like little tubes that carry their secretions directly to the surface of the body.
So they have an exit road, so to speak.
Exactly. Endocrine glands, on the other hand, are ductless.
Meaning?
They secrete their products, often hormones, directly into the bloodstream, so no ducts needed.
Fascinating. So epithelial tissue can be a barrier, a lining, or even a factory. It really highlights just how adaptable this tissue type is.
Absolutely. It's a great example of how structure dictates function in biology.
Speaking of adaptable, it's time we moved on to another essential tissue type. Connective tissue. From what I remember, it's kind of the glue that holds everything together.
That's one way to think about it. But connective tissue is so much more than just glue. We're talking about everything from bones and cartilage to blood and tendons.
Wow, that's quite a range. What makes all those things connective tissues? They seem so different from each other.
You're right, they are quite diverse. But what they all have in common is something called the extracellular matrix, or ECM for short.
Okay, the ECM. Tell me more.
So unlike epithelial tissue, where the cells are all jam-packed together, connective tissue has a lot more space between the cells. And that space is filled with this ECM, which is basically a combination of fibers, ground substance, and specialized cells.
So it's like the stuff between the cells that gives connective tissue its unique properties.
You got it. And because the composition of the ECM can vary so much, it allows connective tissue to perform a huge array of functions throughout the body. It's incredibly versatile.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's break it down, starting with the fibers. What types of fibers are we talking about here?
Well, you've got your collagen fibers, your elastic fibers, and your reticular fibers. Think of them like different types of thread that can be woven together to create a strong and flexible fabric.
Okay, I can picture that. So let's start with collagen. What's so special about collagen fibers?
Collagen is all about strength. These fibers are incredibly strong and resistant to stretching, kind of like the steel cables of your body.
Which is why we find them in tendons and ligaments. Those structures that connect muscles to bones and bones to each other.
Exactly. They're built to withstand a lot of force.
Makes sense. Okay, so what about elastic fibers? Those sound a bit more forgiving.
Exactly. Elastic fibers are all about flexibility and resilience. They can stretch and recoil back to their original shape like tiny rubber bands.
So we've got strength from collagen, flexibility from elastin. What about reticular fibers? What's their superpower?
Reticular fibers are the delicate networkers of the connective tissue world. They're thin and branching, forming a fine meshwork that provides support and structure to organs.
So they're like the scaffolding inside organs, helping them maintain their shape and integrity.
Exactly. You'll find them in organs like the spleen and lymph nodes, creating that essential framework.
Okay, so we've got our fibers, collagen, elastic, and reticular, all playing different but important roles. What about that ground substance you mentioned? What's that all about?
Ah, yes, ground substance. Think of it as the gel-like substance that fills in the spaces between the fibers and cells.
Kind of like the jelly in a donut.
Perfect analogy. And like jelly, ground substance is mostly water, but it also contains molecules like proteoglycans.
Wait, proteoglycans? Those are those water-loving molecules we talked about earlier, right? The ones that act like sponges?
You got it. Proteoglycans are key for attracting and holding water, which helps keep the tissues hydrated and cushioned.
And because it's mostly water, it probably also helps transport nutrients and waste products between the cells, right?
Exactly. It's like the watery highway system of connective tissue.
This ground substance is amazing. I never would have thought there was so much going on in the spaces between cells.
It's a whole other world in there. And we can't forget about the cells themselves. Just like in other tissues, the cells in connective tissue play crucial roles in building and maintaining that intricate ECM we've been discussing.
So we've got cells that make the fibers, cells that secrete the ground substance. It's like a well-coordinated construction crew.
Exactly. And depending on the type of connective tissue, you'll find different types of cells that are specialized for that particular tissue's function.
So it's really a team effort. This is all starting to make so much more sense. Okay, so we've got the ECM, the fibers, the ground substance, and the cells all working together to create this amazing diversity of connective tissues.
And speaking of diversity, your notes mention different categories of connective tissue, like loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, and cartilage, each with its own unique properties and functions, of course.
Okay, so let's break down those categories, starting with loose connective tissue. What's the story there?
Well, as its name suggests, loose connective tissue has a looser arrangement of fibers compared to the other types. It's found all over the body, providing support and cushioning to organs and other tissues. Think of it as the packing material of your body.
Like the bubble wrap that keeps everything safe and sound.
Exactly. It's there to protect and cushion.
And are there different types of loose connective tissue?
There are. You've got areolar connective tissue, which is the most common type. Then there's adipose tissue, better known as fat tissue. And then there's reticular connective tissue, which provides support for organs like the spleen.
So many variations, each with its own specific role to play.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. What about dense connective tissue? What makes it so dense?
Dense connective tissue is all about strength and resisting stretching. Unlike the looser variety, its fibers are tightly packed together, creating incredibly strong and durable structures.
So if loose connective tissue is the bubble wrap, dense connective tissue is more like the duct tape.
I like that analogy. You've got dense regular connective tissue, which is found in tendons and ligaments, providing that incredible tensile strength in one direction.
And then there's dense irregular connective tissue, right, where the fibers run in all different directions.
Exactly. You'll find that in the dermis of your skin, giving it that ability to withstand stretching from multiple directions.
Our skin really is tougher than it looks. Okay, so we've got loose connective tissue for cushioning and flexibility, dense connective tissue for strength and support.
It is, and it really highlights a key theme we've seen throughout our exploration of epithelial and connective tissue, adaptability.
Right. We've seen how these tissues form barriers, provide support, allow for movement, and even repair themselves. From those delicate layers of cells lining our organs to the tough, resilient cartilage cushioning our joints, it's incredible to appreciate the diversity and functionality of these tissues.
Absolutely. They're fundamental to who we are and how our bodies work.
It really makes you realize how interconnected everything is. Well, that was quite the deep dive. We covered a lot of ground today.
We did. From the brick walls of epithelial tissue to the intricate world of connective tissue, it's been quite a journey.
It has. So to our listeners, the next time you think about your body, take a moment to appreciate the amazing world of tissues working tirelessly behind the scenes. Until next time, keep exploring.